My son gave me a key to a new apartment on Father's Day, said it was a place where I could finally retire in peace. But the moment I arrived, the former owner was already waiting at the door and whispered, "Don't turn on the lights tonight. Stand by the east window. What you're about to see will change everything." I froze, but I listened. And when night fell, I raised the monocular, and the instant I looked across at the building opposite, my heart went still. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. That means something. Now tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you joining from today? Let's see how far this story travels. Note, some elements of this story are fictional, added to serve the narrative. Any resemblance to actual names or locations is coincidental, but what this story is trying to tell you is worth your full attention. The coffee was ready at 7:30 the way it always was. I'd been waking up at that hour for 50 years, first out of necessity, then out of habit, and finally out of something closer to ritual. When Eleanor was alive, she used to say I made the coffee too strong. I told her that was the point. She'd laugh and drink it anyway, standing at the kitchen window in her robe watching the square come alive outside. After she passed in 2010, I kept making it the same way. Too strong, 2 cups both for me. Some habits are harder to break than others. Some you don't want to break at all. By 8:30, I was on the front porch. Monterey Square, in June, is something people who've never been to Savannah can't quite picture. The live oaks stretch so wide, their branches nearly touch overhead, draped in Spanish moss that catches the morning light like gray silk. The gardenia hedges along the iron fence were in full bloom, that heavy. Sweet smell that hits you before you even open the front door. The heat was already building the way it does in the south, slow and deliberate, like it's making a point. The cicadas had been going since sunrise. In Savannah, the cicadas always have something to say. I'd sat on this porch every Sunday morning for 15 years. It was the kind of thing that starts as a way to fill time and becomes somewhere along the way, the thing you find yourself looking forward to most. Father's Day had always been a quiet occasion in this house. My son Dominic was a good man, successful, sharp, the kind of person who filled a room without trying. But the years had a way of making the distance between people official. A card in the mail, a dinner reservation usually somewhere too loud to really talk. I'd stopped expecting anything more than that, and I'd made my peace with it. Or so I told myself. They arrived at 9 o'clock, which was earlier than I expected. I heard the car before I saw it. Dominic's black Mercedes turning off Bull Street and rolling slowly up the drive. He got out first, already in motion, before the engine stopped, the way he always moved. His wife Vivienne followed, closing her door with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to be graceful in every small thing. They were dressed well for a Sunday morning. Too well, maybe, though I didn't think much of it at the time. Happy Father's Day. Dominic said, coming up the porch steps 2 at a time. He was 42 years old and still took stairs like he was in a hurry to get somewhere. "We brought you something." He held out a small box, white, no ribbon, the kind of plain wrapping that says the thing inside is meant to speak for itself. I set down my coffee and took it. Inside was a key, a single brass key on a plain ring, and beneath it a card with an address written in Dominic's hand, 432 Bull Street Apartment. 4B, Whitfield Arms, Historic District, Savannah. "It's yours," he said. "We bought it for you." I looked up at him. "A place of your own, Dad. No client calls, no drafting tables, no reason to be anywhere or do anything you don't want to do." He was smiling, the wide, easy smile I remembered from when he was a boy, the one that could talk his way out of anything. "You just retired. You've earned somewhere quiet. Why not?" I turned the key over in my palm. The brass was warm from being in his pocket. 40 years of practice had taught me to read a space before I entered it, to understand a building by its bones, its proportions, its relationship to the light. I had never applied that instinct to a gift. Standing on my own front porch on a Sunday morning in June, I simply felt what any father feels when his child does something unexpected and generous. Something that loosens in the chest, some old knot you'd stopped noticing was there. "Dominic," I said. I didn't have more than that. "Don't make it a whole thing," he said, which was his way of saying he was pleased. Vivienne was standing at the edge of the porch, one hand resting lightly on the railing. She smiled when I looked at her, a clean, appropriate smile, the kind that matched the moment exactly. I noticed it the way you notice something that fits a little too perfectly into its frame, and then I let the thought go. She was a composed woman. She had always been a composed woman. "It's stay for breakfast," I said. "I've got eggs and there's a place on Jones Street that does biscuits worth driving for." Dominic was already checking his watch. "I wish we could. I've got a presentation Monday morning. Big client, government contract, the whole thing. I need the full day to prep." He bent down and kissed my forehead, the way you'd kiss someone much older than you, or someone you felt sorry for. "Enjoy the apartment, Dad. It's got good light. You'll love it." Then he was down the steps. Vivian followed, pausing at the bottom to give me a small wave, gentle, almost apologetic, before sliding back into the passenger seat. The Mercedes reversed down the drive, turned out onto the square, and was gone. I stood there for a moment with my hand still raised. Then I sat back down in my chair. The coffee had gone lukewarm. I didn't bother reheating it. I just sat with the key in my palm and the address card on my knee, looking out at the square where the moss moved in what little breeze there was. The gardenia smell came in waves. The cicadas kept on. Somewhere at the far end of the square, a dog barked twice and went quiet. 42 years. I had known my son for 42 years, and I knew the specific rhythm of his visits, the lean forward when he was interested, the way he rolled his phone in his fingers when he was thinking about something else, the particular manner in which he excused himself when somewhere else was already calling him. I knew all of it. I had paid attention the way fathers do, because attention is what you have to give when time is the thing you gave away too freely when they were young. He was at the end of the drive before I could have called after him. I sat there with those keys in my hand, thinking about how a man can spend 40 years building something, a reputation, a home, a family, and still find himself alone on a Sunday morning, holding a gift he didn't know how to read. I told myself it was a generous thing Dominic had done. I told myself the hurry was just the way he'd always been, always moving, always somewhere to be. I told myself the morning wasn't strange. I was always good at telling myself things. It was one of my oldest skills, and on that particular Sunday, I put it to full use. The key sat in my palm, small and warm and specific. Outside, Savannah went about its business in the heat. I almost didn't go that afternoon. The morning had left something behind, not quite a mood. Not quite a feeling, just a kind of weight that settled in after Dominic's car turned out of the square and didn't lift. I ate lunch standing at the kitchen counter, the way I sometimes do when I'm not really hungry, rinsed the plate and stood there for a while looking at the key on the counter next to my coffee cup. An architect looks at a gift differently than most people. Where someone else sees gesture and intention, I see structure. I see what holds it up, what's underneath. It's an occupational condition, and after 50 years, it doesn't turn off when you retire. I picked up the key at 2 o'clock and drove to Bull Street. The Whitfield Arms sat at 432 mid-block between Charlton and Jones, and I knew the building the way I knew most of the old buildings in the historic district, not personally, but professionally, the way a doctor knows a patient by their chart before ever shaking hands. It went up in 1923, Italianate in style, which in Savannah meant arched windows, bracketed cornices, and a facade that still had something to say after 100 years. The brick was original, the ironwork on the balconies was not. Replaced sometime in the 70s by something cheaper and less considered, which was a shame. The bones, though the bones were exceptional. I parked on the street and sat in the car for a moment before getting out. Old habit. I always looked at a building from the outside, first got a sense of its proportions relative to the street, the neighboring structures, the way it held its space on the block. The Whitfield Arms held its space well, better than it had any right to given what the 70s had done to it. Before I locked the car, I reached into the back and unzipped the worn leather case I kept in the pocket behind the passenger seat. Inside was my monocular, a compact single-lens optical instrument, 8-power magnification that I'd carried to every job site for 4 decades. Most people picture architects with blueprints and hard hats. The reality is that a significant portion of the work happens from a distance, reading a building the way a conductor reads a score, not note by note but as a whole, from far enough away to see what's actually there. The monocular was as much a part of my professional kit as a mechanical pencil. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and went inside. The lobby had its original terrazzo floor cracked in 2 places, and a brass mailbox panel that hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. The elevator was one of those old cage and cable affairs with an accordion gate. I took the stairs, 4 floors up. The treads were heart pine original to the building, and they spoke as I climbed, not the alarming creak of structural failure, but the comfortable conversation of old wood that had been walked on for a century and had opinions about it. I could tell by the sound that the subfloor was solid. Whatever else this building had suffered, nobody had cut corners on the core. Apartment 4B was at the end of the hallway, east-facing. The key turned smoothly, well-maintained lock recently recayed, and the door swung open onto a room that smelled like stillness. The kind of stillness that accumulates over months, not days. Dust lay in a fine, even layer across the hardwood floors, and the afternoon light came through the eastern windows in long shafts that made the particles visible, drifting slowly in the air like the building was breathing. I stood in the doorway for a moment, reading the room the way I always read a new space. The floors were white oak, 3/4-inch tongue and groove original. The ceiling was 11 feet at minimum, possibly 11.2. I'd measure it properly before making any judgment. The crown molding was plaster, not the polyurethane imitation you see in renovated buildings. And whoever had done it originally had done it correctly, with proper relief and clean returns at the corners. The walls had been repainted at least twice in the past decade, both times in colors chosen by someone with more confidence than taste. But that was a surface issue. Surface issues are fixable. I moved through the rooms methodically the way I always do, touching the walls at intervals to check for moisture, testing the window frames for play, crouching to look at the baseboard detail. The kitchen plumbing needed work. The bathroom tile was a lost cause. Everything structural was sound. Then I came to the east window in the main room. I stopped. Directly across from me on the other side of Bull Street, 50, maybe 60 feet at most, was the Drayton Building. I knew it well. I'd walked into it 5 days a week for 30 years. 3 stories of early 20th century commercial architecture, ground floor retail offices above, and on the 3rd floor at the southwest corner, a glass-walled conference room that I had specified myself during a renovation in 2003. The conference room of Prescott Architecture Group. I could see the long table, the leather chairs, the projection screen along the far wall. I could see the whiteboard with something written on it in blue marker, though not what it said. I took out the monocular. At 8 power magnification, 58 feet of air between 2 buildings is nothing. The room came into focus the way a radio station does when you finally land on the frequency suddenly, completely with a clarity that made me feel for a strange moment, as though I could reach out and touch the table. I could see the grain on the conference table. I could see the frame site plan I'd hung on the east wall in 2011, the one from the Forsyth Park renovation. I could see the slight scuff on the baseboard near the door that the cleaning crew had never managed to get out. I lowered the monocular, stood there. An architect understands sightlines the way a chess player understands the board, not as a feature of the moment, but as a condition that was designed into the space from the beginning. You don't discover a sightline like this. You establish it. You measure it. You make a decision about it, and then you build accordingly. Someone had made a decision about this window, about this apartment, about the precise angle of view from this specific room to that specific building. I put the monocular back in my pocket and looked at the glass of my old conference room across the street for a long time. 58 feet, 3rd floor, southwest corner. I designed enough buildings in this city to know you don't arrive at a sightline like this by accident. You engineer it. The only question was who had done the engineering and what exactly they had intended for me to see. I was still standing there, turning that question over in my mind, the way you turn a set of drawings looking for the flaw when someone knocked on the door. The knock came at exactly 3:15. I know because I had just checked my watch, an old habit from 30 years of construction schedules, where 3 minutes late could mean a concrete pour gone wrong and 6 figures lost before sundown. The sound was unhurried, 3 measured strikes of knuckle against wood, the kind of knock that does not beg entry but simply announces it is owed. I set down the monocular on the windowsill, where it rested beside the notebook I had been filling with observations about the Drayton Building's 3rd floor conference room across the way. The projection screen, the long mahogany table. The particular way the afternoon light fell through those tall glass panels at an angle, no accident of design could explain. Someone had drawn those lines deliberately. I had been turning that thought over in my mind like a stone, with a strange weight to it when the knock arrived. I crossed the room. The heart pine floorboards announced every step a low, resonant creak that seemed too large for a room this quiet. The afternoon light came in long and amber through the west window, laying shadows across the floor in slanted bars. The kind of light that makes everything look like it belongs to a different era, which in a building raised in 1923 perhaps it did. I opened the door. She stood in the corridor as though she had always stood there, as though the hallway itself had been built around her presence and not the other way around. 79, I would have said. If pressed, though, the word old felt imprecise, the way calling a courthouse old misses everything that matters about it. Her posture was the first thing I registered. Straight. Not the rigid straightness of effort, but the kind that comes from decades of standing before rooms full of people who needed to believe the person at the front would not yield. White hair. Cut close and clean, gone past silver, into something cooler, more final. A pale blue linen dress, the color of sky in early morning before the heat arrives. Her hands were folded in front of her, unhurried. But it was the eyes that stopped me. I have read buildings my entire professional life. The way a structure holds its age in the bowing of a beam. The hairline fractures in plaster that tell you where the foundation has shifted. The settled patience of a wall that has absorbed a century of weather. This woman's eyes carried the same quality. They had witnessed a great many verdicts. They were not unkind. But they were certain in a way that most eyes are not, and that certainty was not warm. "Mr. Prescott," she said, not a question. "Yes." I did not ask how she knew my name. Something in the architecture of her expression told me the question would be answered in its own time, and not before. "My name is Estelle Fontaine. I apologize for arriving unannounced." She paused, glancing once past my shoulder into the room before returning her gaze to me. "I lived here for 22 years, in this apartment. I sold it 4 months ago." I stepped back from the doorway without quite deciding to. "Please come in." She moved through the entry with the deliberate care of someone returning to a place that still belongs to them in the ways that matter. She did not look around the room with curiosity. She looked around it with recognition, the way a person looks at something they have memorized and are now checking against memory. Her gaze moved to the west window almost immediately, and she crossed to it, slowly stopping at the precise spot where I had been standing when the knock came. She looked out at the Drayton building for a long moment without speaking. "I used to stand here every evening," she said finally. 22 years. The light at this hour, it comes through those glass panels on the 3rd floor over there, and does something particular." She did not elaborate. She did not need to. I came to stand beside her, a careful distance maintained. Below us, Bull Street ran quiet in the afternoon heat, the live oaks throwing their long shade across the pavement. A slow ceiling fan visible through an open window of the house across the way. Savannah at this hour moves like a man who has nowhere urgent to be, and nowhere is that more true than in the historic district, where the streets seem to have agreed long ago to slow the passage of time. "You were a judge," I said. It was not a guess. She turned her head slightly toward me. 21 years on the Chatham County Superior Court bench. I retired in 2018. A pause. "I handled your son's business incorporation case in 2009, and before that," she stopped. "I presided over a divorce case in 2005 that involved parties known to both of us. I will leave it at that for now." I did not press. "The building teaches you patience." "At the sale of this apartment," I said instead. "You mentioned it was 4 months ago. It was not entirely voluntary." She said it plainly, the way a person states a fact they have decided to stop being ashamed of. There were pressures applied. Legal in their form, if not in their spirit. I am familiar enough with the law to know the distance between the two. Her jaw tightened briefly, then released. "I hoped I was wrong about the shape of what I was seeing. I am not often wrong, Mr. Prescott. I had hoped this would be one of the exceptions." The room was very quiet. From somewhere below, a mockingbird ran through its catalog of borrowed songs. "You said you know Dominic," I said, "since he was 12 years old." She looked back out the window. "His Little League team played in Forsyth Park in the summer. I watched 3 seasons from that bench by the fountain. I knew his mother before." She stopped again. Whatever door that sentence led to, she chose not to open it. "I know what he is capable of. I know what he is capable of now." She turned from the window and faced me directly, and in that moment, the retired judge was entirely present. "Mr. Prescott, tonight do not turn on any lights in this apartment after dark. Come to this window at 9 o'clock and watch the 3rd floor of that building across the street." She gestured toward the Drayton building, where the glass conference room panels now caught the late sun like bronze mirrors. "What you will see, I cannot tell you what to do with it. That decision belongs to you, but you should see it before any other decision is made." I held her gaze. "Why didn't you come to me before today?" Something moved across her face, a shadow of something older than this conversation. "Vivienne," she said quietly. "She called me twice in the past 3 weeks. Both times the call was cut short. I did not know whether she was unable to speak or unwilling. I was not certain enough to act." She drew a slow breath. "I am certain now." She moved toward the door with the same quiet authority with which she had entered. At the threshold, she stopped once more, one hand resting on the doorframe, and looked back at the room at the west window, at the long amber light, at the monocular still resting on the sill. "You measured it," she said. It was not a question either. "The sightline." 58 feet, I said. "Diagonal, 3rd floor, northwest corner." A faint expression crossed her face, something between recognition and grief. He chose this building deliberately, Mr. Prescott. You should ask yourself why a son who knows his father is an architect would give him a window with a precise view of a room where documents are signed. She left before I could answer. I stood in the long amber silence of the empty apartment and looked at the Drayton building, and for the first time since 9 o'clock that morning, the key in my jacket pocket felt like something other than a gift. Estelle Fontaine had been gone for nearly 2 hours before I moved from the spot where she left me. Not because I was paralyzed. An architect does not freeze, he measures, he recalculates, he searches for the load-bearing error before the structure comes down. I stayed because somewhere in the back of my mind, trained by 4 decades of reading buildings, I understood that what was coming required stillness first. I did not turn on the lights. I pulled the chair away from the window, not to sit in it, but so that its silhouette would not show against the glass from the street below. Then I sat on the floor, back against the wall beside the window frame, the monocular resting across my knee, my phone face down on the heart pine boards beside me. The apartment smelled the way old buildings smell when they have not been lived in for a season: dry wood, faint plaster dust, the ghost of someone else's years embedded in the walls. Estelle's years I now understood, 22 of them. Outside, Bull Street continued at its Sunday pace. A car moved slowly past headlights not yet needed in the long southern dusk. From the restaurant at the end of the block, the one with the green awning I had noticed on the drive-in, came the sound of laughter, a burst of it, easy and unsuspecting. Someone's birthday, maybe. Someone's ordinary evening. The smell of something grilled drifted up through the open window and reminded me that I had not eaten since the coffee and biscuits at Monterey Square that morning, when my son had handed me a key and called it a gift. I did not eat. I waited. In Savannah in June, the sky does not surrender to darkness quickly. It negotiates. The light goes from gold to copper to a bruised purple that hangs over the rooftops for longer than seems possible, as though the city has an arrangement with the sun that other places do not. By 7 o'clock, the live oaks along the square had become dark shapes rather than trees, and the gas lamps along Bull Street had flickered on, throwing their amber circles onto the pavement below. At 7:12 p.m., the lights in the third-floor conference room of the Drayton building came on. I raised the monocular. He came into the room, the way he always enters a room he believes he owns, one hand adjusting his jacket lapel, the other already reaching for the nearest chair. I have watched Dominic walk into rooms for 42 years. I know the way his left shoulder sits fractionally lower than the right, a habit formed in childhood, from carrying a too heavy backpack on one side, and I had corrected it a dozen times before accepting it was simply part of how he moved through the world. I know the precise way he pulls a chair back from a table, a quick outward jerk 2 inches further than necessary, a gesture of confidence bordering on impatience. He was wearing the navy suit, the one Vivian had given him for his birthday 14 months ago. I had been there when he opened the box. 3 other men followed him into the room. I did not recognize any of them. One was broad-shouldered and gray-haired, carrying himself with the ease of someone who has sat at many tables where significant decisions were made and has never been uncomfortable at any of them. The other 2 were younger, one in a dark jacket who moved to the laptop set up at the near end of the table, and the third who said almost nothing and stood to one side in the manner of a man whose job is to witness, not to speak. They spread documents across the mahogany table, from 58 feet and 4 floors of diagonal distance through an 8-power monocular. I could not read the text. I want to be precise about what I saw and what I did not see, because an architect who exaggerates his measurements is not an architect. I could not read the words, but I did not need to read the words. The document folder on the table was dark blue, legal-sized, and the top page carried a logo printed large and centered at the top of the sheet. Navy blue ink, a specific sans serif typeface. 2 interlocking geometric forms, a design I had approved in 1989 when this firm was nothing but a drafting table in a converted garage on Abercorn Street, and a belief that good design outlasts everything else. The logo of Prescott Architecture Group. I have seen that logo on blueprints, on building permits, on award plaques, on the side of a truck I owned for 11 years. I would know it from twice this distance. I would know it from across a river. The man in the dark jacket opened the laptop, and a presentation appeared on the wall screen, large enough that I did not need the monocular for what came next. The lines on that screen were not strangers to me. I had drawn them by hand before transferring them to software. I knew where every load-bearing wall fell, where the central atrium would catch morning light at the precise angle I had spent 3 weeks calculating, where the roofline broke against the sky in the way I had argued for through 6 rounds of client revision. 3 years of my life lived inside those drawings in the space between the lines. The Meridian International Commission, currently in final stage negotiation. The project that was meant to be the last signature work of a 40-year career. I watched Dominic pick up a pen. He did not read the page in front of him. He signed it the way a man signs something he has already decided about without hesitation. Without the small pause most people make even when they are certain. A clean, committed stroke. He slid the folder across the table. The gray-haired man added his own signature. They shook hands. A brief and businesslike exchange, the kind that follows an agreement that was reached before the room was entered. By 8:20 p.m., the lights were off. The documents gathered, the 3 men gone. The conference room was dark. I lowered the monocular. I sat on the floor of the empty apartment for a long moment and let the full weight of it settle, the way a building settles not all at once but in careful increments, each shift acknowledged before the next one comes. My logo, my design, the work of 3 years and the culmination of 40, being signed away in a room I could see from a window my son chose for me by a man I raised to people I have never met. I did not need to read the fine print. I have spent 4 decades reading structures. I knew precisely what I was looking at. My phone moved against the floorboards, a single vibration. I picked it up, a text from Dominic. "Happy Father's Day, Dad. I hope you're enjoying the apartment." As I turned the phone face down and set it back on the floor, the city below carried on, as cities do. The restaurant laughter, the slow cars, the mockingbird somewhere in the square, cycling through its borrowed repertoire. Savannah had no idea. The gas lamps burned the same amber they always had. I sat in the dark and I did not call him. I picked up the monocular one more time, not to look across the street, but because holding it gave my hands something to do, while my mind did what it always does when it finds damage it did not expect. Not panic, not grief, not yet. First understand the full scope of what has failed. Measure every crack. Identify every point of stress. Then decide what to do about it. I did not drive home. I knew better than that. A man who walks into his own house carrying what I was carrying that night without having first decided exactly what shape he intends to give it does not walk in as himself. He walks in as the uncontrolled version, the one who says things that cannot be unsaid, and moves pieces on the board before he understands the full geometry of the game. I have made that mistake once in my professional life early on, when I confronted a contractor about falsified load calculations before I had assembled every document I needed. He denied it, covered his tracks in the 12 hours it took me to regroup, and it cost me 4 months and a significant sum to unwind the damage. I did not intend to make it again. So I drove 4 blocks north and pulled into the small parking area off Oglethorpe Avenue, the kind of lot that exists in the historic district without calling attention to itself. A strip of cracked asphalt behind a row of townhouses lit by a single pole lamp that did more to define the darkness around it than to push it back. I cut the engine. The Savannah night came in immediately, the sound of cicadas working their full summer register, the heat pressing through the open window at 84 degrees, even at this hour. The distant suggestion of traffic on Abercorn Street 1 block over. I sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. Then I found the number in my phone, Marcus Bellamy, saved 8 years ago. After a mid-level project manager in my firm had been quietly redirecting subcontractor payments into a shell account for 11 months before the discrepancy surfaced in a quarterly audit, Marcus had identified the full scope of the fraud in 5 days, documented it cleanly, and handed me a package that my attorney at the time described as the most organized private investigation file she had ever received. I had paid him, thanked him, and hoped I would never need to call again. I called. He picked up on the second ring. Bellamy. The voice of a man who answers his phone the same way at 9 in the evening as he does at 9 in the morning, no warmth added, none removed. Marcus, it's Walter Prescott. A half-second pause, the kind that means recognition rather than confusion. Walter, it's been a while. 8 years, I said. I need your help. Tell me what you have. That is what I have always respected about Marcus Bellamy. He does not perform concern. He does not offer reassurance before he has the facts. He simply opens a channel and waits for information to move through it. I organized what I had seen into the sequence it deserved, not the emotional sequence, not the order in which it had landed in my chest, but the factual order, the kind that would hold up under scrutiny. I told him the building, the floor, the time, the address of the Drayton Building on Drayton Street, 3rd floor, northwest-facing conference room. The precise time the lights came on, 7. 12 p.m. and the time they went off, 8:20 p.m. I described the three men I did not recognize: the broad-shouldered, gray-haired one, who moved with the authority of a man accustomed to closing rooms; the younger one who operated the laptop; the third who stood to one side and said nothing. I described the document folder, dark blue, legal-sized; the logo on the cover page; the presentation on the wall screen; the architectural drawings I recognized as my own work on the Meridian International Commission; Dominic signing without reading; the handshake. Marcus asked no questions while I spoke. I could hear the quiet rhythm of keys, steady and unhurried. When I finished, he said, "What do you need from me?" "Three things," I said. "The identity of all three men in that room tonight. Full bank records for Prescott Architecture Group. For the last 12 months, I want to see every outgoing transaction above $10,000. And any legal filings tied to the company or to any of my personal property in the last 6 months. Deeds, transfers, contracts, anything recorded with the county." "Understood." Keys again. 48 hours. "You have 48 hours, I said. "But Marcus, there is a contract worth $4.5 million that may be close to closing. I need to know the timeline on that before anything else moves." A pause. Not the thinking kind, the finding kind. "Walter." His voice had shifted almost imperceptibly, the slight change of register that I had heard from him once before, 8 years ago, when he had found the Shell account. "I'm in the Chatham County Public Records System." "All right." A longer pause. The cicadas outside my window continued their indifferent chorus. "There's a power of attorney on file," he said. "Filed 3 weeks ago. It designates Dominic Prescott as agent for Walter J. Prescott full authority over all property transactions and business dealings." The interior of the car was very quiet. "I never signed a power of attorney," I said. "I know." He said it without drama, which was the right way to say it. "Because the notarization seal on the document belongs to a man named Humphrey Stahl. Office on Liberty Street." I'm pulling his license record now. Keys. He's been flagged twice in the last 4 years. Procedural violations, the filings describe them as irregular notarization practices. Both complaints were settled without formal disciplinary action. I let that sit where he had placed it. A power of attorney. Not a forged deed, something far more dangerous than that. A forged deed can be challenged on its face, compared against a known original, tested against a chain of title. But a valid power of attorney, or one that appears valid, stamped with the right seal and recorded in the right office, does not require my signature on any subsequent document. It is my signature on everything, on every contract, every transfer, every transaction. For 3 weeks, my name had been available to Dominic on demand, in any room, at any hour, for any purpose he chose to apply it to. I understood now why the meeting had taken place on Father's Day. Not sentiment, timing. He needed me in that apartment, occupied and grateful while the last pieces were positioned. I started the car. "Marcus," I said, "keep working." "I will," he said. "Walter, be careful who you speak to before I call you back." "I know," I said, and ended the call. The drive home took 11 minutes. Oglethorpe to Abercorn, south through the squares, the gas lamps marking each block in amber, the city as composed and unhurried as it always is at this hour, as though nothing beneath its surface has shifted at all. I used every one of those 11 minutes to decide what kind of man I intended to be for whatever came next. When I pulled into Monterey Square and cut the engine, I had my answer. I would not confront him. I would not call him, question him, give him a single reason to accelerate whatever timeline he was working against. Instead, I would do what I have always done when I find structural failure in a building I am responsible for. I would document every crack, map every point of stress, establish the full scope of the damage before I touched a single load-bearing wall. A man who calls the police before he has every document in order hands his opponent time to adjust. I had seen that once before early in my career, and I had never made the same mistake twice. I would build a case the same way I have built everything in this city, from the foundation up. Broughton Street at 10 minutes before 8 on a Monday morning has a particular quality that I have always appreciated. The city is present, but not yet performing. A runner moved past me on the sidewalk without glancing up, earbuds in her breathing measured and private. The coffee shop 2 doors down from the Thorne Legal Group had its lights on and its door propped open. And the smell that came out of it was the specific smell of a city beginning to remember what it is for. The law office itself was dark behind its glass front. The brass plate beside the door, catching the early light, Thorne Legal Group, established 2004. I had been standing there for 5 minutes when Evangeline Thorne came around the corner from Drayton Street. She is 61 years old, though she carries it the way certain buildings carry their age, not by concealing it, but by having been well built in the first place. Silver hair cut short and precise. Dark blazer over a white shirt. She walks with the purposeful unhurriedness of someone who has never in her professional life been late, and therefore has no relationship with the particular anxiety that produces rushing. She saw me standing at her door from half a block away, and did not break stride, did not adjust her expression, did not reach for her phone to verify an appointment she knew she did not have. She simply came to the door, put her key in the lock, and said, "Come in. Coffee first." I have known Evangeline Thorne for 19 years, long enough to have her number in my phone without having to search for it, not long enough to have ever needed her professionally. She had handled the legal work on 2 of my larger commercial properties' easement disputes, nothing dramatic. What I knew of her reputation came from other architects, other developers, the kind of quiet professional consensus that forms in a city the size of Savannah over many years. People said she was methodical. People said she did not lose. People said she was the kind of lawyer who read documents the way surgeons read scans for what was there, and for what was conspicuously absent. The office smelled of old paper and good coffee, and the faint cedar of a bookcase that lined the entire north wall. She poured 2 cups without asking how I took mine, she remembered, which told me she had been paying attention across 19 years of occasional contact, and set mine on the corner of her desk. Then she sat down, uncapped a pen, and opened a yellow legal pad. "Tell me everything," she said. "In order." I told her in order. I began with the key, the small wooden box, the handwritten address, Dominic's particular way of presenting it, as though the gift were already slightly overdue. I moved through the afternoon at the apartment, the monocular, the sightline. I told her about Estelle Fontaine and what she had said and how she had said it. I told her about the conference room lights coming on at 7:12 p.m., about the logo I recognized from 58 feet. About the presentation on the wall screen and what I had understood when I saw those lines projected large and white against the dark of that room. I told her about the signing, the handshake, the text message from my son at 8:20 p.m. I told her about Marcus Bellamy and the Chatham County records and the name Humphrey Stahl and the 2 prior flags on his notary license. Evangeline wrote throughout without interrupting, not shorthand full sentences in a clean, compressed hand that moved quickly without appearing to hurry. She did not look up from the page while I spoke. I have learned over many years that the quality of a professional's listening is legible in what they do with their hands while you are talking. She was recording, not waiting. There is a difference. When I finished, she capped the pen. Then she opened the laptop on her desk and navigated without comment to the Chatham County Superior Court Public Records portal. She found the filing in under 2 minutes. "Power of attorney," she said, reading. "Filed May 26, 2025, Principal Walter J. Prescott, Agent Dominic R. Prescott. Scope full authority over all real property transactions, business contracts, and financial instruments." She turned the screen slightly toward me. "Notarizing Officer Humphrey Stahl, Liberty Street, stamp number 4471-GA. I looked at the document on the screen. My name at the top, in the standard legal typeface of a Chatham County filing. My name on a document I had never seen, never signed, never authorized. "There is a second filing," Evangeline said. Her voice had not changed in register, but something in the deliberateness of the sentence told me she was measuring how she delivered what came next. She scrolled down. "An amendment to the original POA, filed June 11th, 4 days before Father's Day." She paused. "There is a co-signatory on the amendment, Vivian Ashford Prescott." The name sat in the room for a moment. "Vivian has no authority to sign anything related to the company," I said. "She is not a shareholder. She holds no directorial position. Her name should not appear on any legal instrument connected to Prescott Architecture Group." "No," Evangeline said, "it should not." She looked at me steadily, which means either she agreed to this voluntarily or her signature was forged alongside yours. Given that Humphrey's office handled the notarization on the original, it is likely the amendment passed through the same hands or through someone working with access to his seal. She picked up her phone without asking whether I wanted her to, which was the right decision. This was not a moment for courtesy. It was a moment for information. She dialed Vivian's number and set the phone on the desk between us, speaker activated. It rang 3 times. "Hello." Vivian's voice was careful in the particular way of someone who has not been sleeping well and has been waiting for a call they dread without knowing exactly what form it will take. "Vivian, this is Evangeline Thorne. I am a lawyer here in Savannah. I am sitting with Walter Prescott. I need to ask you one question and I need you to answer it honestly. Evangeline's voice was not unkind, but it was precise. Have you ever signed a power of attorney amendment naming yourself as a co-authorizing party on behalf of Walter Prescott's business holdings? The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I found myself watching the phone as though it might tell me something the silence would not. Then Vivian said, what does that mean? What document wandas sawasis brackets verse? June 11th, filed with Chatham County. Your full legal name is on it. What came next was not anger. It was not denial. It was a sound I have heard only a few times in my life, the specific involuntary sound a person makes in the moment they understand all at once, the full dimension of how they have been used. It is quieter than rage. It is more devastating than tears. It is the sound of a person's self-understanding reorganizing itself around a truth it did not previously contain. Evangeline let it run its course. She did not fill the silence with reassurance. When Vivian's breathing steadied, Evangeline said quietly, "Thank you, Vivian. I will be in touch today. Please do not speak to Dominic about this call." She ended it and set the phone down. "She didn't know," I said. It was not a question. "No." Evangeline picked up her pen. "He forged her signature as well." A pause measured and precise, which makes her our most important witness if she is willing. She looked at me across the desk. "Will she be willing, Walter?" I thought about the sound Vivian had made on the phone. Not the cry of someone who had been deceived by a stranger. The cry of someone who had built years of her life around a person and had just heard the foundation give way. "Give her an hour," I said. "She will be willing." Evangeline had already begun writing before I finished the sentence. I left Thorne Legal Group at 9:15 and walked back out onto Broughton Street where the morning had completed its transition into full workday noise. The coffee shop crowded now. The sidewalk busy, a delivery truck double parked outside the pharmacy on the corner. The city going about its ordinary concerns entirely unaware. The POA was the spine of everything Dominic had built. The notary stamp, the forged signatures, the amendment timed 4 days before Father's Day. It was a skeleton designed to hold weight. But a skeleton built on false joints does not hold forever. I needed to find Vivian before that skeleton moved again. She had chosen the corner table herself, the one farthest from the door, half screened by a tall potted fig tree that someone had positioned with either excellent aesthetic instinct or excellent practical instinct, depending on what kind of conversation you needed to have. Foxy Loxy, at mid-morning, runs at a particular register, art prints on exposed brick walls, the low grind of an espresso machine. A handful of regulars with laptops who are too absorbed in their own lives to pay attention to anyone else's. It was a good choice. I noted it. Vivian Ashford. Prescott had been my son's wife for 6 years. In that time I had seen her at holiday dinners, at the occasional company event, at the small gatherings Dominic organized when he wanted witnesses to his generosity. I had formed impressions the way you form impressions of people you see in controlled settings, pleasant, composed, careful with her words, in the way of someone who has learned that words in certain rooms carry weight. I had never sat across from her the way I sat across from her now, with nothing between us but 2 untouched cups of coffee and whatever she had decided to tell me. She looked like someone who had not slept. Not disheveled. Vivian did not do disheveled, but there was a quality of thinness around her eyes that had nothing to do with makeup and everything to do with a particular exhaustion of a mind that has been working without permission all night. I sat down. I did not offer pleasantries. "Tell me what you know," I said. "All of it, from the beginning." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at the table for a moment. Then she began. Dominic had changed in October of 2024. She used the word change carefully, the way a person uses a word they have auditioned many times before settling on it. Not dramatically, not a rupture, not a scene, more like a door that had previously been open, beginning to swing incrementally toward closed. Meetings she wasn't told about. A laptop that acquired a password it had not previously had. Cash withdrawals from an ATM on Drayton Street, not large amounts individually, but regular and never explained. She had asked once. He had said it was business expenses easier in cash for certain vendors. She had not asked again. In January of 2025, she had come into his study to leave a dry cleaning receipt on his desk and seen a document open on the surface, not on screen, a printed page with her name partway down. She had read 3 lines before Dominic appeared in the doorway. He had explained it smoothly, without visible agitation, a routine corporate restructuring, a formality that required her name as a household consignatory on certain filings, nothing that affected her directly, nothing that required her attention. She had nodded. She had left the room. I believed him, she said. Or I wanted to, which isn't the same thing, but at the time I was letting myself treat it as though it were. She had stayed quiet through February, told herself she was being paranoid, told herself that a man who was genuinely hiding something would not have explained so calmly. In March, she had stopped telling herself things. I started photographing, she said, whenever he left the laptop open and walked out of the room, whenever there was a printed page left on the desk. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew something was wrong and I needed... She stopped. I needed something to be real, something I could look at and know I hadn't invented. She put her phone on the table and slid it toward me. 23 screenshots. Organized by date, she had renamed each file with the month and a number, which told me that whatever fear had driven the collecting, her mind had stayed precise throughout it. The oldest was dated March 4th. The most recent was June 9th, 6 days ago. I scrolled without speaking. Email chains, fragments of documents, a contact list entry, a scanned signature page with a notary stamp I recognized from Marcus's description the night before. The emails were addressed to and from an account I did not recognize, a name that appeared in 9 separate threads over the span of 4 months. Grant Halford. Grant Halford. I said, writing the name into my own phone. Who is he? Vivian shook her head. I don't know. I tried to search the name twice and both times Dominic came home before I could finish. But he is in almost every email from the last 6 months. She paused. Always about property. Always about deadlines. Always about... She hesitated as though the phrase still carried the particular cold of the first time she had read it, making sure the transfer was clean. She pushed the phone another inch toward me. Is this what you need? I looked at the 23 photographs, email threads referencing property transfers, a contact list that included the name of a man I did not know, a notary stamp belonging to Humphrey Stahl on a signature page bearing my name. It's a start, I said. I held my phone beside hers and opened AirDrop. 23 files crossed between the 2 devices in the time it took her to exhale once. I folded 2 20s from my wallet and left them on the table beside the cups neither of us had touched and walked out into the late morning heat of Bull Street. I forwarded Halford's name to Marcus before I reached my car. His reply came back in 40 seconds on it. And Walter, go see your neighbor, today, before anything else. I stood beside the car with the phone in my hand. My neighbor. There was only one person Marcus could mean. Cornelius. Cornelius Batch had lived at 17 Monterey Square for 31 years, long enough that the square itself had come to seem like an extension of his property. The old live oaks and the central fountain, as familiar to him as his own front steps. He was 77 years old, retired 11 years from the Savannah-Chatham Metropolitan Police Department, where he had spent 4 decades as a detective before his knees and his patience for departmental politics gave out at roughly the same time. We had been neighbors for 22 of those years. We had the kind of friendship that does not require maintenance, the kind built from proximity and mutual respect, and the shared understanding that neither man needs to fill silence with noise. He opened the door before I reached the top step. I figured you'd come by eventually, he said. He stepped back to let me in. No handshake, no preamble, no performance of surprise. Been waiting since Friday, tell the truth. The front rooms of his house are tidy in the way of a man who lives alone and has made his peace with it. The back study is something else entirely. 40 years of a detective's habits do not retire when the badge does the walls carry framed photographs from cases he was proud of. A corkboard that still holds index cards in his particular color-coded system. Bookshelves arranged not by subject, but by the frequency with which he needs to consult them. The room smells of coffee and printer ink, and the specific lived-in quality of a space where serious work has been done for a long time. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and settled into his own, with the deliberate care of a large man whose joints have opinions. You know from when? I asked. February. He said it without hesitation, the way a man says something he has been rehearsing the delivery of for several months. Didn't understand the full shape of it then, but something was wrong with what I was seeing, and 40 years of that job teaches you not to talk yourself out of wrong. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk, so I kept records. The manila envelope was thick, legal-sized, sealed with the metal clasp bent down twice in the way of someone who has opened and resealed it more than once. He pushed it across the desk without ceremony. 47 photographs. Printed on standard paper, clean and sharp, Cornelius had always owned a camera worth the name. a habit from decades of crime scene documentation. I spread them across the desk in the order he had numbered them, on the back in pencil, the way evidence is handled. The locations were all recognizable. River Street with the Savannah River running brown and slow in the background, a corner table at one of the outdoor bars taken from the walkway above. The City Market parking area, off Franklin Square, mid-daylight. Two men beside a dark sedan with Georgia plates. A restaurant on Whitaker Street shot through the window from the sidewalk. Table visible between hanging plants. 9 locations in total across 4 months, February through June. The meetings were not random. They followed a pattern always public enough to be defensible, always chosen for ambient noise and multiple exits. The tradecraft Cornelius would have called it. Of men who have thought about being watched. The one he meets most often, Cornelius said, tapping the photograph on top. Count the appearances. I went through the stack. The same face in frame after frame, a man in his mid-50s, broad through the shoulders, silver hair cut close. The particular way of holding himself I had noticed through the monocular 2 nights ago in the Drayton Building conference room. 31 out of 47 photographs. My phone buzzed. Marcus. Grant Halford, 4 prior fraud convictions, 2 in Fulton County, Georgia, 2014 and 2017, 2 in Charleston, South Carolina, 2019, all real estate related, currently operating under Coastal Legacy Properties LLC. Registration filed in Delaware 2022, no Georgia business license on record. I set the phone on the desk beside the photograph. The man in the photograph and the name on my screen were the same person. I did not need Cornelius to confirm it, but he looked at both and nodded once. The way a detective acknowledges a fact that has now been sufficiently established. He selected one photograph from the middle of the stack and placed it apart from the others. Dominic and Halford in a parking area, the light suggested early evening. The location looked like the east side of City Market where the foot traffic thins out. They were shaking hands, not the handshake of 2 men completing a transaction. The grip was held a beat too long, both men leaning in, slightly the body language of an agreement that goes beyond the paper version. 40 years on the job, Cornelius said. That is not a business handshake. He said it quietly, with the flat certainty of someone who has cataloged the taxonomy of human deception at close range for 4 decades. That is 2 men who know they are doing something they cannot undo. I looked at the 47 photographs spread across the desk of a retired detective who had spent 4 months waiting to hand them to me. 9 months of secret meetings, 4 prior criminal convictions across 2 states, my son's name appearing alongside Halford's in every transaction Marcus is pulling from the county records. The picture is getting clearer with every hour, and considerably worse. "Can I take these?" I asked. Cornelius had already made his copy. I had not noticed him do it, but that was the point. He pushed the originals across the desk without a word. I was at the door when he spoke again. "Walter?" His voice carried the particular weight of a man who chooses his final sentences carefully. "Whatever this is, it's bigger than Dominic." He said it the way detectives say things they have known for a while, and waited for the right moment to release. Not a warning exactly, a calibration. "I'm starting to understand that," I said, but I did not yet know how much bigger. That answer was waiting for me on Liberty Street. The office was the kind of small that happens gradually, a room that starts out merely modest and slowly fills with the sediment of years until there is barely a corridor left between the door and the desk. Cream-colored walls gone slightly yellow, Venetian blinds drawn to the halfway point. The afternoon light coming through in slanted bars that landed across stacked folders, and a calendar 3 months out of date. A desk lamp with a warm bulb burning even in the middle of the afternoon, as though the man who worked here had long since given up on the overhead fixture and made his separate piece. Humphrey Stahl was 63 years old, and looked older in the way of men whose anxiety has been compounding interest for a long time. He was signing a document when I came through the door. He looked up. The color left his face in the particular way it leaves the face of a man who has been waiting for something to arrive and has spent months pretending to himself that it might not. I did not speak. I crossed to his desk, set down the photograph from Cornelius's collection, Dominic and Halford City Market parking area, February, and stepped back. He looked at it. He looked at me. He opened his mouth. "I don't know what you think that—" I set down the second item, a printed copy of the power of attorney, filed with Chatham County on May 26th. His stamp number in the lower right corner, his commission seal pressed and dated. He closed his mouth. I set down the third, the flag complaint records Marcus had pulled. 2 prior procedural violations, both within the last 4 years. both resolved without formal action, the kind of record that represents not a clean history, but a temporarily contained one. Humphrey Stahl looked at the 3 items arranged on his desk, and something in him stopped performing. I have watched people make that decision the moment they calculate that the cost of maintaining a story has finally exceeded whatever the story was protecting. It does not look like relief. It looks like exhaustion that has been waiting for permission to show itself. He was quiet for a moment. Then he told me. Dominic had come to his office in April, walked in much as I had without an appointment, with the same quality of deliberate, unhurried arrival that signals a man who has rehearsed this conversation and is not concerned about the outcome. He had a folder, inside it, documentation of a gambling debt from 6 years ago, a private arrangement that had been paid and settled and buried by everyone involved, except apparently Dominic. $31,000 borrowed from a man who did not use banks or lawyers. The kind of debt that leaves no official record but can be made to leave other kinds. Dominic had been precise. He was not asking for much: 2 documents, a stamp, a date, a signature line. If Humphrey complied, the folder went away. If he did not, the folder went to the Georgia Superior Court Clerks Cooperative Authority, the body responsible for notary commissions in this state. And Humphrey Stahl would find himself explaining his financial history to the people who held his livelihood in their hands. "My wife has been sick for 3 years, Humphrey said. He said it without asking for sympathy, which made it harder to hear than if he had. My youngest is 2 years from finishing his degree. I had nothing else. He looked at the desk surface. I told myself it was just paper. That paper doesn't hurt anyone. I did not tell him he was wrong. He already knew he was wrong. That is the particular loneliness of a man who has made a bad decision. With open eyes, there is no comfort available from being told what he already understands. But you kept something, I said. He looked up. You kept something, I said again, or I wouldn't be here. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he reached into the bottom drawer of his desk, the one with the keyed lock, which he opened with a small brass key on his keychain, and placed a brown envelope on the desk between us. Inside, 2 documents. The first was a power of attorney. I had signed in March of 2022, my handwriting, my signature notarized by a different office properly witnessed. I had drawn it up at Eleanor's insistence. My wife had been thorough about such things, even before she became ill. And after her diagnosis, she had been immovable on the subject of having everything in order. The document named Eleanor Prescott as my agent for all property and business decisions. It had been legally voided by her death 14 months later, in the autumn of 2023. The second document was the one Dominic had brought to Humphrey's office in April. I placed them on the desk, side by side. The forgery did not require expertise to identify. The signature on the false document reached for mine, the way a copy always reaches for an original, close enough in form to suggest familiarity, different enough in execution to reveal its distance from the genuine article. The date had been constructed to appear as a fresh signing. The agent's name had been changed. The scope had been expanded well beyond what any standard personal POA would contain. I'm not a good man, Humphrey said. I know that, but I kept those. He gestured toward the 2 documents. I don't know if that counts for anything. It counts, I said, and I meant it not as absolution, not as comfort, but as a plain statement of fact. Without testimony, we had inference. Without the document Dominic had handed to Humphrey, and that Humphrey had quietly photographed and preserved and locked in a drawer against the day someone came asking, without that, we had a case built on observation and second-hand records. With it, we had something a forgery examiner could measure, something a prosecutor could hold, something that left no reasonable room for doubt. I left his office at 4:15. The afternoon heat on Liberty Street was the full weight of a Savannah June, the kind that makes the pavement seem to hold its breath. 28 hours until the Meridian contract was scheduled to close. My phone rang as I reached the car. Walter? Marcus's voice had the particular quality I had learned to read in him, not alarm, but the compression of a man who has found something and is deciding how to transmit it. I need you to drive somewhere. Don't go in. Just drive past, look at the dumpster on the left side of the building. He gave me an address on Price Street. I recognized it immediately. My doctor's office. Something in the way he said it kept me from asking questions. I got in the car and drove. I had been Gerald Moss's patient for 12 years. That is not a small thing in the way that people sometimes treat medical relationships as merely transactional. A doctor who has known you for 12 years holds a particular kind of inventory. The shoulder that started giving trouble in 2017, the blood pressure numbers that crept upward after Eleanor died, the insomnia that came and went and came back again. The reading glasses prescription that had changed 4 times. He holds the record of your body's accommodations and failures across a stretch of time long enough to constitute a genuine biography. You do not hand that to a stranger. You hand it to someone you have decided to trust. I sat in the car with the engine off and looked at the front of his office. Moss Medical Practice occupied the ground floor of a narrow 3-story building on Price Street, red brick white trim. A small brass plaque beside the door that I had passed through dozens of times, without considering what it meant that a door could become familiar enough to stop being a door and simply become the entry to a place you go when something is wrong with you. The afternoon light hit the building at a low angle. The street was quiet in the particular way of a residential block at the edge of the business day, when foot traffic has thinned, but the workday has not yet released its full volume. The dumpster was on the left side of the building, half screened by the corner of the neighboring structure. I could see from 30 feet the edge of something white against the dark interior. Not inside the dumpster resting on the rim, as though someone had set it there and then reconsidered the act of disposing it, but had not reconsidered enough to take it back inside. A thick white envelope, the logo of Moss Medical Practice printed in the upper left corner. Marcus had gotten there. First, he had photographed the contents before I arrived and sent them to my phone without explanation, because no explanation was needed. I looked at his photographs rather than retrieving the envelope myself. Clean images, clinical in their precision. The document inside ran to 4 pages. Medical Cognitive Assessment Report. Patient: Walter J. Prescott. Date of examination: June 10th, 2025. Examining physician Gerald R. Moss, M.D. The conclusion occupied the bottom third of the first page. Patient demonstrates significant indicators of early-stage cognitive decline. Assessment finds materially diminished capacity for independent decision-making in matters of financial and legal complexity. Follow-up evaluation recommended within 90 days. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the passenger seat and looked through the windshield at a building I had trusted for 12 years. On June 10th, I had been in my office on Oglethorpe Avenue until 4 in the afternoon, reviewing structural specifications for a project in Hilton Head. My assistant had brought me lunch from the place on Broughton Street. I had signed 3 documents, none of them medical. I had not been within 6 blocks of Price Street. I had never taken a cognitive assessment in my life. Not voluntarily, not knowingly, not in the presence of Gerald Moss or anyone else. But the document existed. It had my name at the top, his signature at the bottom, and a date stamp from his office. It had been prepared and printed and placed in a file that could, at the right moment, be presented to a court as evidence. I understood what it was for. If the POA were challenged and the forgery exposed, a competency question would need to be answered before any of it could unravel cleanly. A man who can be credibly described as showing significant cognitive decline by his own physician, of 12 years no less, is a man whose account of events becomes easier to dispute. His testimony becomes shakier. His collection of photographs, screenshots, and documents becomes the product of a confused mind rather than a methodical investigation. The document would not need to be introduced immediately. It only needed to exist available, ready to be deployed, the moment Walter Prescott became a problem. That was the architecture of it. Not a single document, but an interlocking system, each piece designed to reinforce the others. The POA gave Dominic authority. The cognitive assessment would remove mine. I picked up my phone and dialed Gerald Moss's private line, the number he had given me 7 years ago, after a late evening scare with my heart that had turned out to be nothing serious. Because he had said, call this number directly if something like that happens again. I had never used it for anything other than its intended purpose. He answered on the second ring. Silence. Not the silence of a bad connection, not the silence of a man collecting his thoughts. The silence of a man who has seen the name on his screen and is experiencing the specific paralysis of someone who has done something that cannot be undone and has now been found out. 7 seconds. I counted them. The line went dead. He had ended the call. I sat with the phone in my hand. 12 years. The shoulder, the blood pressure, the insomnia, the reading glasses. Every vulnerability I had ever walked through that door and described, all of it now context, for a document he had signed with my name at the top. 18 minutes later, Marcus sent a photograph. Time-stamped 5:03 p.m. Gerald Moss. In his white coat, he had not even stopped to change parking his car in the small lot behind Dominic's office building on Drayton Street and moving toward the back entrance with the quick, head-down urgency of a man who needs to tell someone something before someone else does. Marcus had the image from a public vantage point. Legal, clean, usable. 2 minutes after that, a second message. Raymond Whitlock was present at Moss's office on June 10th. Signed in as a visitor at 2:15 p.m. Left at 3:40 p.m. He's your lead designer. Walter has full access to every file in the company's system. Raymond Whitlock, 26 years old, hired 18 months ago on Dominic's recommendation. Given access to the Meridian drawings within his first quarter, because Dominic had argued the project needed fresh eyes on the technical specifications. I had agreed. I had found the young man talented, methodical, quiet in the way of someone concentrating. I had not found him suspicious because I had not been looking. 12 years. Gerald Moss had been my doctor for 12 years. I had given him the complete account of my body's history, its weaknesses and its recoveries, everything that constitutes the private record of a man's physical existence. And 18 minutes after I called his private line, he was walking through my son's back door. I did not need a transcript of that conversation to understand what it contained. I called Marcus. Raymond Whitlock, I said. What is he to Dominic? A pause, longer than the ones Marcus usually took. That, he said carefully, is something I think you need to hear in person, not over the phone. Another pause. Tonight, Forsyth Park, come alone. Marcus had sent me Raymond's full file at 7 that evening, while I was still sitting at my kitchen table, working through the documents from Humphrey's envelope. I read it in the way you read something you already partly know, not for the facts themselves, but for the shape of how they connect to everything else. In March of 2020, Raymond Whitlock had redirected $28,000 in vendor payments through a secondary account he had opened in his own name. A young man, 23 years old at the time in his first professional position, making a decision that people who have never been desperate sometimes find incomprehensible, and that people who have been desperate understand immediately. I had discovered it during a routine audit in September of that year. I had sat with him for 2 hours in my office door closed and listened to everything he said. He had not made excuses. He had repaid every dollar over the following 18 months quietly by arrangement. I had not reported it. I had not terminated him. He had been in the years since one of the most conscientious people in the building. Dominic had known about it. He had always known he had been in the building. That September had seen the closed door, had asked me about it afterward and received a partial answer. Partial had been enough. I drove to Forsyth Park and found a bench near the fountain with a clear sightline to the main path from Bull Street. The fountain was lit from below, the water catching the light and scattering it in the way of a thing that is simply doing what it has always done, indifferent to the hour, or to whatever is being discussed nearby. The air smelled of cut grass and the faint sweetness of the Confederate jasmine that climbs the iron fence along the park's edge. 78 degrees at 11 in the evening, which in Savannah in June means summer has fully committed and there is no negotiating with it. He came from the Whitaker Street entrance, hands pushed deep into the pockets of a light jacket that made no sense in this heat. That detail, the jacket, the buried hands told me everything about the state he was in before he said a word. Anxiety has its own dress code. Raymond Whitlock was 26 years old. He had been with my firm for 18 months, brought in by Dominic, and I had watched him grow into the work the way the best young architects do, not by performing confidence, but by developing it through the specific accumulation of problems solved and solutions built. I had believed in him. I had given him access to the Meridian drawings because I trusted his eye. I had in some part of myself that I had not examined carefully enough. Thought of him as the young designer I wished I had been, and perhaps as something closer than that. He stopped when he saw me, looked at the bench, looked at the file folder I had placed in the space beside me. He did not look at my face. I did not speak. I did not need to. 26-year-olds who carry guilt the way Raymond was carrying it do not require an opening question. They require only permission to begin. And sometimes permission is simply the silence of someone who already knows enough that there is nothing left to protect. He sat down at the far end of the bench. After a moment, he told me. Dominic had come to him 11 months ago, not aggressively, not with the folder open on the table, as he had done with Humphrey. Dominic was subtler than that. He had simply mentioned, during what appeared to be a casual conversation after a late evening in the office, that he had come across something in the 2020 records that he wasn't sure what to do with, and that he supposed it was a family matter, and family matters were sometimes better handled internally. Raymond had understood the shape of the room he had just walked into. He had not needed it explained. The arrangement was not complicated. Dominic needed access to things Raymond could provide, internal scheduling system passwords that would allow after-hours file access, the specific dates and agenda items for meetings where the Meridian timeline would be discussed, small pieces of information individually unremarkable, collectively a map. Raymond had delivered them because the alternative was a conversation he had spent 3 years believing was behind him. 3 weeks ago, Raymond said, still not looking at me. He asked me to sign a witness statement confirming you had been present at a meeting in early June, a meeting where certain documents were discussed. A pause. You weren't at that meeting. There was no meeting. He wanted me to confirm something that didn't happen. You refused. I refused. He said it the way you say a thing that cost you significantly. I told him I would not sign a false witness statement. He told me I would regret that. Raymond was quiet for a moment. That was the night I understood it had gone somewhere I couldn't follow him, and I started recording. He reached into the interior pocket of the jacket and placed a USB drive on the bench between us. Georgia is one-party consent. He said he had done his research, which told me he had been thinking about this moment for 3 weeks. Every call I recorded I was a participant in. It's admissible. There are 6 files. The emails are on there too, pulled from my work account before I lost access. You lost access? Last Friday. Someone revoked my permissions to the Meridian folder. He paused. I'd already made copies. I tried to reach you that afternoon twice. The calls went to voicemail. I told myself I would come in person Monday. I told myself that was soon enough. He stopped. I was wrong about that. I picked up the drive. He told me there was one file in particular, third chronologically. In it, Dominic's voice in the flat transactional tone of a man conducting business. Moss confirmed Walter called him. Raymond, if Walter reaches out to you, you know nothing. Understood. 4 words. Moss confirmed Walter called. Gerald Moss, the same man I had entrusted with my body's history for 12 years, reporting my phone call to my son within the hour. The circle was closing from every direction. 7 families, Raymond said then. His voice had dropped to something barely above the register of the fountain behind us. I pulled the full list from the Halford correspondence before I lost access. Properties across Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. 7 separate transactions. 7 families who signed over something equity partial ownership, full deed. Halford runs the acquisition side and takes the asset. Dominic provides the architecture angle. Makes it look like a legitimate development deal. He stopped. Walter, His voice caught in the specific way of someone who has been holding a sentence back for a long time. I should have come to you months ago. I knew it was wrong. I told myself I was protecting myself, but I was just afraid. He pressed the USB into my hand, stood up and walked back toward the Whitaker Street entrance without looking back. I watched him go. I sat alone beside the Forsyth fountain for a time that I did not measure. The water moved through its pattern lit and indifferent. Eleanor had loved this park in the particular way she loved all things in Savannah, not with sentiment, but with the ease of someone who has genuinely made a place her own. The city will still be there on Monday morning, she used to say. On the evenings I brought work home and sat at this very bench with a rolled drawing under my arm, unable to stop calculating. It had been her way of telling me that whatever I was building would wait. I looked at the USB in my palm. 12 hours to the Meridian closing. 7 families. I stood and walked back to my car. At my kitchen table until 2 in the morning, I laid it all out in the order it would need to be presented, cross-referencing Marcus's financial records against the dates on Raymond's emails, matching the names in the Halford correspondence against the county property filings, building the timeline from February through Father's Day with the precision I would have given a structural drawing. When I finally went to bed, I knew exactly what was there. Every piece, every connection, every date. What I needed now was not more evidence. The evidence was complete. What I needed was someone who could walk into a courtroom at first light and convert 4 days of accumulation into something capable of stopping a clock. The bank opens at 8. We were there at 7:30. Evangeline had made the call at 6:15 that morning. I know because I was already awake sitting at the kitchen table with the USB and the organized files from the night before. When my phone rang and she said only, "Meet me at First National on Broughton in 1 hour. Octavia Brennan will be there." She had not explained who Octavia Brennan was. She had not needed to. The name carried in her voice the particular weight of someone who has already done the necessary groundwork while the other person was still sleeping. We stood on the sidewalk outside the bank in the early morning quiet of Broughton Street. The heat was already present at this hour, the kind of June morning in Savannah that does not pretend the day will be cool and then disappoint you, but announces its intentions from the first light. Evangeline was reviewing something on her phone. I was looking at the brass-handled doors and thinking about what was on the other side of them. Octavia Brennan unlocked the front door at 7:58 and held it open for us without ceremony. She was the bank's chief compliance officer, a title that sounds administrative until you understand what it actually means. She is the person whose job is to watch, to record, and to report. 31 years in banking had given her the particular stillness of someone who has learned that the most important skill in her profession is not analysis but patience, the willingness to observe a pattern across many months before acting. Because acting too early gives the subject time to adjust, and acting too late gives them time to finish. She was 60, perhaps 62, with the kind of economy of movement that comes from having sat through thousands of hours of transactions and learned to distinguish the meaningful from the routine. She led us to a conference room at the back of the building where a folder of documents was already arranged on the table. She had been here before we arrived. She poured coffee without asking, set the cups down, and sat across from us. I filed the first suspicious activity report in April. She began without preamble. By then, I had 14 transactions flagged in our internal system, all from the Prescott Architecture Group operating account, all structured to fall beneath the $10,000 threshold that triggers automatic currency transaction reporting requirements. She slid the top document toward us. Structuring transactions to avoid that threshold is itself a federal offense under the Bank Secrecy Act. I filed with FinCEN. That filing initiated federal-level monitoring of the account. I looked at the transaction summary. 14 entries each, between $7,000 and $9,000, spread across 6 weeks in March and April. No single transaction large enough to trigger automatic reporting. Together, they totaled $412,000. The full picture, Octavia continued. Across the account since February is considerably larger. She turned to the next page. $1 million $240,000 transferred out of the corporate account over 14 weeks. The transfers went to 3 destinations. She indicated the column on the right side of the page. A holding account registered to Coastal Legacy Properties LLC, a personal account in Dominic Prescott's name, and one transfer direct of $45,000 to a Gerald Moss at a practice address on Price Street. The room was quiet except for the low sound of the building's air conditioning. $45,000. Gerald Moss had not simply been pressured, he had been paid. There is a meaningful difference legally and otherwise between a man who does a wrong thing because he is afraid and a man who does a wrong thing because he is invoiced for it. The second man has much less room to construct a sympathetic account of his own conduct. This morning, Octavia said, at 5:03 a.m., a transfer order was placed from the corporate account. $820,000. Destination Coastal Legacy Properties, LLC. She looked at us both. The transfer is currently in pending status. It has not cleared. Evangeline set down her pen. Because of the SAR. Because of the SAR and because your call this morning gave me the legal basis to apply an internal compliance hold while we await judicial authorization. Octavia folded her hands on the table. The hold is a temporary measure. Our internal policy supports it for up to 72 hours under active SAR circumstances. But to freeze the account beyond that, to prevent that transfer from clearing permanently, and to protect the remaining assets, I need a court order. She looked at Evangeline with the directness of someone asking a question she already knows the answer to. How long do you need? 4 hours, Evangeline said. Octavia considered this for exactly as long as it deserved, which was not long. Then you have 4 hours. She pushed the complete SAR documentation across the table, the original filing, the FinCEN acknowledgement, the 14 flagged transactions, the full transfer history, and the pending order for $820,000 frozen at 5:03 a.m. on the morning of the day the Meridian contract was scheduled to close. 31 years in this building, Octavia said. She was not addressing the room. She was addressing me, in the particular way of someone who understands that the facts she has assembled belong to a person sitting across from her, not simply to a case file. I have watched a great many people attempt to move money that did not belong to them through accounts they did not have the right to control. I have never allowed one to finish. She held my gaze steadily. Mr. Prescott, your company's money is still in this building. Let us keep it that way. We left the bank at 8:40. Broughton Street had completed its transition into the full morning, the coffee shop 2 blocks east open, and busy the delivery trucks making their rounds. The ordinary Monday of a city that did not know what was being assembled inside the buildings around it. Evangeline was already moving phone in hand, walking at the pace of someone whose mind has shifted into a different register. "I'll file the emergency ex parte temporary restraining order within 2 hours," she said. "Every piece of physical evidence, the USB, the POA, originals from Humphrey, all of it needs to be at my office before 10. She did not look up from her phone. "I'll handle the rest. I had one more stop to make. Not to gather anything. Every document, every photograph, every file had already been accounted for and would be in her hands within the hour. This stop was different. I had been carrying something since 11 o'clock the previous night, and there was a person who needed to receive it before this day moved any further. Everything Walter has built in 4 days comes down to the next 4 hours. Before I take you inside, courtroom 4, drop a 4 in the comments. Simple as that. Just let me know you're still in the room. This story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. Some details are not drawn from a single source, but the truth underneath them is something I believe you'll carry with you. Before I went to Evangeline's office, I made one stop. Estelle Fontaine answered her door at 8:50 in a house robe and reading glasses, a cup of tea in her hand, with the unhurried composure of a woman who has been expecting company even when she has not been told to expect it. I handed her the folded piece of paper I had written at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, not a legal document, not evidence, simply an account of what had happened since she knocked on the door of apartment 4B on a Sunday afternoon and told me not to turn on the lights. She held it for a moment without opening it. "Is it done?" she asked. "Not yet," I said, "but it will be today." She nodded once and closed the door. I drove to Broughton Street. At 9 o'clock, I laid everything on Evangeline's conference table in the order I had organized it the night before. The USB drive from Raymond 6 audio recordings and a complete email archive. The 47 photographs from Cornelius numbered in pencil on the reverse. The original POA documents from Humphrey's locked drawer. The genuine instrument from 2022 and the forged version side by side. The bank documentation from Octavia. 14 flagged transactions, the SAR filing the FinCEN acknowledgement, and the pending transfer order for $820,000. The screenshots Vivian had collected across 3 months, each renamed with its date. The cognitive assessment report from the dumpster on Price Street. Marcus's compiled financial summary. Evangeline stood at the head of the table and looked at it all for a long moment, the way a person looks at something they have heard described and are now seeing in its full physical dimension. "In 20 years of practice," she said, "I have never walked into a courtroom carrying a more complete record." She set her hands flat on the table. "Walter." A pause. "There is no going back from this. Once I file, this becomes a matter of public record and criminal referral. Everything that follows for Dominic, for Moss, for everyone whose name is in these documents will be irreversible." I had been awake since before 5. I had read everything twice. I understood what irreversible meant. "File the petition," I said. She was already reaching for her briefcase. At 10:15, the door to the conference room opened, and Evangeline introduced Detective Beauregard Taft of the Savannah-Chatham Metropolitan Police Department, a large, quiet man in a dark jacket who had the deliberate economy of movement that comes from many years of sitting in rooms where things were about to become official and learning not to disturb that process. He shook my hand with the particular formality of someone who is conducting himself for the record. "Mr. Prescott," he said, "I want you to know that the Federal Bureau of Investigation has been conducting a parallel investigation into Coastal Legacy Properties LLC and its associated transactions for 14 months. The suspicious activity report, filed by First National in April, was the third such report connected to entities affiliated with Grant Halford across 3 states. He set a single page on the table, a case number, a court, a date of filing. This morning, the United States District Court for the Southern District of Georgia issued a federal asset freeze order covering all accounts and instruments associated with Coastal Legacy Properties, Dominic R. Prescott and 4 additional named individuals." A pause. "Dr. Gerald Moss is among them. The room absorbed this. 14 months. The federal investigation had been running since April of 2024, 12 months before Dominic had walked into Humphrey Stahl's office with a folder of old debt. Whatever Dominic believed he had been building it inside a structure that was already being observed from above. At 10:47, Evangeline filed the emergency ex parte petition for a temporary restraining order at the Chatham County Superior Court. I sat in the gallery and watched her present to the Honorable Patricia Calloway, a different Ashford than Vivienne, a coincidence of surnames that meant nothing except that Savannah is at its core, a city of a certain size where names recur. Evangeline argued three elements in the precise order the law requires. First, irreparable harm. The Meridian contract was scheduled to close in 73 minutes. And a transfer of intellectual property rights under a forged power of attorney would create damage that could not be fully remedied after the fact. Second, clear evidence. She placed the two POA documents before the court, the 2022 original and the forged instrument, and said simply, the signatures do not match, and the notarizing officer has confessed under interview. Third, likelihood of prevailing on the merits. She referenced the federal asset freeze already in place, the audio recordings obtained under Georgia's one-party consent statute, and the 14-month federal investigation that had produced its own parallel findings. She spoke for 11 minutes. Judge Patricia Calloway signed the order at 11:48. The TRO covered the Meridian transaction, the pending bank transfer, and all instruments executed under the disputed power of attorney, the federal freeze already active, extended coverage to the interstate dimensions of the scheme. 2 orders, 2 jurisdictions, the same result. Everything stopped. Marcus called at 11:58. It's done, he said. All accounts frozen. The Meridian closing just fell apart. Their attorneys received notice from the court 4 minutes ago. A brief pause. Dominic was notified at 11:51. I was standing on the steps of the Chatham County Courthouse in the full noon heat of a Savannah June, de Baz, looking across Wright Square at the live oaks that have been standing in that spot longer than any building I have ever designed. I said nothing. At 12:01, my phone showed Dominic's name. I let it ring. At 12:03, it rang again. I answered. There was a silence on the line, not the silence of bad reception, not the silence of a man collecting himself. The silence of a man standing in the wreckage of something he had constructed over months and believed to be sound, listening to it come down. Then, how? Not a question, a word, repeated. How? I had heard that word spoken in exactly that register once before 20 years ago, when a contractor I had trusted with a foundation had substituted inferior fill material and stood beside me watching the first wall crack open along a line I had not designed, saying, how can this be happening? Not because he did not understand the physics of what poor foundations do to buildings, but because he had been so certain he would not be caught. That discovery itself seemed to violate some law he believed in. How is not the sound of remorse? It is the sound of a man who trusted his own architecture and is watching it fail. I ended the call. That evening he came to the house. I had been sitting in the same chair for 3 hours when I heard the key in the lock. I did not move. The bourbon was on the side table where I had placed it at 5:32. Fingers neath the glass still full, and the ice long since melted into nothing. The lamp in the corner was on low. The windows were open to the square, and through them came the sound that Savannah makes in the deep of a June evening, the cicadas at full register. The distant suggestion of traffic on Abercorn Street, the occasional voice from somewhere along the block, a city going about the warm and ordinary business of a Tuesday night. The door opened. Dominic stepped inside. He saw me immediately. I had positioned myself in the chair directly across from the entrance, which he would have recognized as deliberate because he knows this house the way anyone knows a house they grew up in. He closed the door behind him. He was still in the clothes I imagined he had worn to the closing that never happened. The dark jacket, the open collar. A man who had dressed for a significant day and been unable to revise himself since. He crossed to the center of the room and stopped. Dad, whatever you think you saw. I lifted the first envelope from the stack on the table and set it down without opening it. He stopped talking. I lifted the second, the third. 4 envelopes in a line on the table between us. Photographs, the POA documents, the bank statement summary, the cognitive assessment report that had spent the night in a dumpster on Price Street. I did not open any of them. I did not speak. The contents of those envelopes had already been read by a judge. They did not need to perform for Dominic. He looked at them. Something in his posture shifted the particular recalibration of a man who had come prepared for one kind of conversation and has recognized he is in a different one. You have to understand, he said, and his voice had moved into a different register, softer, more careful, reaching for the tone of a man explaining something complicated to someone he loves. The company was in trouble, Dad. Real trouble. Not the kind that shows up in the numbers you were watching. Deeper than that. I was trying to protect what you built. I was trying to make sure there was something left. Everything you were describing, I said, has been placed before a judge. He was quiet for a moment. Then he tried the last door available to him. I have a medical evaluation, he said, from a physician who has known you for 12 years, a formal assessment indicating early cognitive decline. Dad, he paused, and to his credit, there was something in his face that was not entirely performance. I have been worried about you, about whether you have been able to make clear decisions. Any attorney will argue that the evidence you collected was gathered by someone whose judgment, I picked up my phone from the arm of the chair and pressed play. Moss confirmed Walter called him. Raymond, if Walter reaches out to you, you know nothing, understood Dominic's voice. From a Tuesday evening 3 weeks ago, coming out of a speaker in a room he had grown up in. The quality of the recording was clean and flat and entirely without drama, the way the most damaging evidence usually is. The room went completely quiet, not the quiet of a conversation pausing. The quiet of a man who has just heard the door he was standing behind open from the other side and found that there is no room beyond it. 7 seconds. I counted them the way I had counted the silence on Gerald Moss's phone line, not with impatience, but with the steady attention of someone documenting a moment they know they will remember with precision for the rest of their life. Dominic sat down. He had not been invited to, but his legs had made the decision independently. He looked at the floor between us, and for the first time since he had walked through the door, he looked like someone whose age I could accurately calculate, not the controlled forward-moving version of himself that he presented to every room he entered, but something younger and more uncertain underneath. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed again. Not performance this time, something quieter than that. Does it always have to end this way? He said it to the floor, or to the space between us, or to no one in particular. Even before he stopped. The sentence hung there unfinished. The way sentences hang when the person speaking them has reached the edge of something they had not planned to say. He did not complete it. I looked at my son. I looked at the set of his jaw and the slope of his left shoulder fractionally lower than the right. A habit from a childhood backpack that I had corrected a dozen times and eventually accepted as simply part of how he moved through the world. I looked at the hands that had signed a document at a conference table in the Drayton building 4 days ago. And I tried with the full and honest effort of a man who has spent 40 years attempting to understand the structures people build and why they build them, to locate something I recognized. I found it. That was the worst part. I found it. I have loved you every day of your life, I said. Every single day, without condition and without accounting. I let that sit for a moment. That is why this is the saddest room I have ever sat in. I stood up. I walked to the front door and opened it. The night air came in the jasmine from somewhere along the square, the cicadas, the amber of the gas lamps casting their familiar circles on the pavement below. Good night, Dominic. He rose from the chair. He crossed the room. He passed through the door without looking at me, without speaking, and walked down the front steps into the dark with the careful, deliberate gait of a man concentrating on the precise placement of each foot as though the pavement itself could not be trusted. I closed the door. I stood with my hand on the latch and listened. The engine of his car starting a sound I have known since he was 16 years old, and I taught him to drive in the parking lot of a warehouse on the east side of the city that I was renovating at the time, the engine moving away down the street, diminishing, gone, and then only the house. The same house it had been for 40 years, the same furniture, the same arrangement of rooms, the same particular creak of the floorboard just inside the dining room threshold that Eleanor and I had. Always meant to fix and had come to regard as a kind of announcement whenever one of us came home late. All of it still here, all of it intact, but quiet now in a way it had not been before. Not the quiet of a house whose occupants are sleeping, the quiet of a house that has been asked to hold something it was not built to hold, and has managed it and is resting. I went back to the side table. I picked up the bourbon. I held it for a moment, the weight of the glass, the color of the liquid in the low lamplight. Then I set it down without drinking. There was nothing I wanted to blur. I went upstairs. I slept without dreaming, which surprised me. In the morning before I had finished the first cup of coffee, there was a knock at the door. Not a key. A knock. 2 deliberate sounds, unhurried and official. 2 men in suits on the front steps of the house, the Monterey Square fountain visible over their shoulders. the morning light clear and full and without any sympathy whatsoever. There are moments that arrive with a particular quality of inevitability. Not surprise exactly because some part of you has understood they were coming, but a weight that exceeds what you had prepared for, nonetheless. I had known since Tuesday morning, standing on the courthouse steps, that Wednesday would bring something official. I had not known the precise shape of it until I opened the door. Beauregard Taft stood on the front steps of my house with two people I had not met, before a woman in her late 30s with a credential wallet already open at eye level, and a man behind her who was holding a document folder, the way professionals hold things they intend to refer to. The morning light was clean and unhurried. The fountain in the square behind them moved through its ordinary pattern. "Mr. Prescott," the woman said. "Special Agent Dana Calloway, FBI. We have an arrest warrant for Dominic R. Prescott. He's currently in custody." A brief pause, professional and not unkind. "We'd like to speak with you with your attorney present at a location of your choosing. We can go to her office if you'd prefer." I set my coffee cup down on the entryway table. "Give me 5 minutes," I said. Evangeline was at her office before we arrived. Taft had called ahead, which told me these arrangements had been made at a level above the Wednesday morning knock on the door. She was standing when we came in, 4 chairs already positioned around the conference table, a fresh legal pad open in front of her seat. She looked at me once, a quick and thorough assessment. The kind that checks whether a person is holding together before the room fills with difficult information. I was holding together. Special Agent Calloway led the presentation with the efficiency of someone who has delivered this particular account enough times to have found its clearest form. Coastal Legacy Properties, LLC, had been operating since 2022 under Grant Halford's direction, using Delaware registration to obscure beneficial ownership. The company's stated purpose was real estate acquisition and development. Its actual function was the systematic targeting of elderly property owners and business principals, identifying individuals with significant illiquid assets, establishing relationships through false professional pretexts, and executing fraudulent transfer schemes designed to move ownership before the victim understood what had occurred. Halford had 4 prior convictions and had adapted his methodology after each one becoming more sophisticated with each iteration. Dominic Prescott was recruited into the network in September of 2024, Calloway said. Initial contact was made through a third party at a real estate conference in Atlanta. He was identified as having access to a significant target, a parent-owned architectural firm, with a high-value commission in active negotiation and an owner approaching retirement age. She said this without editorializing, which was professional of her, and did not make it easier to hear. Your firm and the Meridian Commission represented the largest single transaction in the network's history, $4.5 million in intellectual property rights, combined with the corporate assets we've traced through the Octavia Brennan SAR filings. Taft set a photograph on the table. I recognized the man in it immediately, not from any prior introduction, but from Cornelius's stack of 47 prints numbered in pencil on the reverse. He appeared in 11 of those photographs, always peripheral, always at a distance that suggested presence without participation. The man who was never quite in the center of the frame, but was always close enough to the center that removing him would have changed the composition entirely. This individual, Calloway said, is the architect of the network, a man known in federal records as Douglas Fenn, operating through a series of holding companies across 3 states. Halford operates the acquisition side at his direction. Your son was recruited to provide the inside access password schedules, the power of attorney filing the medical documentation. She tapped the photograph once. We have 14 months of federal investigation. We have financial records and corporation documents, and the interstate transactions that establish the RICO pattern across 3 states. What we have not had until this week is the internal evidence connecting the network's outside operations to its inside agent. She looked at the USB drive on Evangeline's table, Raymond's 6 recordings and email archives sitting in a plain black case in the morning light. "Mr. Prescott," she said, "your testimony and this evidence are the final pieces we need to close the chain." The room was quiet. Evangeline's pen rested still against the legal pad. Taft sat with his hands folded in the patient way of a man who has learned that some silences should not be filled. I thought about Raymond standing in the dark at Forsyth Park, pressing a drive into my hand and saying I should have come to you months ago. I thought about Vivienne at the corner table at Foxy Loxy, hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She never drank from, telling me about 3 months of photographs taken in fear and preserved in hope. I thought about 7 families whose names were in a file on that drive, people who had built something across the course of their lives and had sat across from someone who appeared trustworthy and had signed something they did not fully understand. I thought about the particular sound a building makes when its foundation has been compromised, not a dramatic collapse, but a slow and incremental shifting, each crack following the path of least resistance, each failure making the next one more likely. I looked at Evangeline. She gave me the small, deliberate nod of someone confirming that the decision is entirely mine and that she will support whatever it is. "Tell me what you need," I said. The weeks that followed had the quality of work, methodical, detailed, one task completed before the next one was begun. Depositions. Evidence review sessions in a conference room at the Federal Building on Bull Street, where I sat across from 2 assistant U.S. attorneys and answered questions for a combined total of 14 hours across 6 separate meetings, cross-referencing the photographs from Cornelius against the financial records Marcus had compiled, reviewing Raymond's recordings with a forensic audio specialist who confirmed their integrity and provenance. 3 weeks of building something, the way I have always built things from the foundation, with attention to each element before placing the next one on top of it. On a Monday morning in July, I put on the suit I had worn to Eleanor's funeral. It is a dark charcoal, a weight appropriate for winter, which made it entirely unsuitable for a July morning in Savannah, and which I wore anyway because it was the only garment I owned that felt commensurate with what the day required. I looked at myself in the mirror in the upstairs hallway, the mirror Eleanor had chosen and hung in that spot 31 years ago, because she said the north-facing light was honest. I drove to Wright Square. I was sitting on the courthouse steps when Cornelius found me. It was 7:50 in the morning and already 91 degrees, the kind of heat that does not build across the day but arrives fully formed, as though the city has simply agreed to be this temperature and sees no reason to ease anyone into it. I had been there for 20 minutes with my jacket folded across my knees and a button open at my collar, watching the pigeons work the pavement around the base of the steps with their particular combination of industry and indifference. Cornelius sat down beside me without comment and held out a paper cup of coffee. I took it. A few minutes passed. Taft came up the steps from the parking area on Montgomery Street, saw us both, and stopped. He looked the way detectives look when they have reached the day they have been building toward for a long time, and find that it feels less like victory and more like wait. "Ready?" he said. I considered the question honestly. "No," I said. "Let's go anyway." Courtroom 4. On the second floor of the Chatham County Courthouse is a room that takes itself seriously. High ceilings, dark wood, the particular quality of institutional light that makes everything happening inside it feel permanent and considered. I had been in rooms like it before, on the witness side of professional disputes and easement challenges. I had never been in one for anything like this. Evangeline's presentation lasted 40 minutes. I have watched her work before across 19 years of occasional professional contact, and I have always known she was methodical. What I had not fully understood was the quality of her stillness under pressure, the way she moved through evidence without urgency, placing each piece in its position, the way a careful hand places a stone in a wall, understanding that the structure holds not because any single element is exceptional, but because everything fits. When Dominic's attorney introduced the cognitive assessment report, 4 pages bearing Gerald Moss's signature, and my name and a date on which I had been 40 miles away reviewing structural specifications, Evangeline set a folder on the judge's bench without raising her voice. Credit card records from June 10th, a time-stamped security log from the building on Hilton Head where I had spent that afternoon, a cell tower record placing my phone 11 miles from Price Street at every hour of that day. Judge Patricia Calloway looked at Dominic's attorney over her reading glasses with the particular expression of a judge who has not been insulted often and does not intend to become accustomed to it. "Counselor," she said, "I would encourage you to consider very carefully what you place before this court going forward." Dominic's attorney sat down. They came in separately, which was the right decision. 3 witnesses who had each arrived at this room by different roads and for different reasons, and who deserved to give their accounts without the weight of the others already in the air. Vivienne spoke quietly and without hesitation, the way a person speaks when they have decided that precision matters more than composure. She described the document she had seen on Dominic's desk in January, the months of photographing screens in an empty room. The name Grant Halford appearing again and again in language about clean transfers and closed timelines. She did not look at Dominic while she spoke. I understood that. Humphrey Stahl placed 2 envelopes on the evidence table with hands that were not entirely steady. He described the visit in April, the folder of old debt, the specific words Dominic had used. He did not ask for sympathy, and the room did not offer any, which was the correct arrangement for everyone involved. Raymond was last. He was 26 years old in a courtroom that had seen considerably older men broken by considerably smaller truths. And he sat in the witness chair with the specific quality of someone who has already done the hardest part, which was telling the truth the first time in a park at 11 o'clock at night. To a man who had trusted him and had reason not to. Everything after that was repetition. When he finished, I looked at Dominic, just once. Across the width of the courtroom, in the moment before the next procedural movement began, I let myself look directly at my son. His head was down. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, the left shoulder slightly lower than the right. The habit of a too-heavy childhood backpack that I had corrected a dozen times and eventually accepted. 42 years I had known this person. I had known his first word, his first architectural drawing, a lopsided house in crayon at age 5, that I had kept in a folder. I still had every version of the person he had been on his way to becoming this one. I had not seen this one coming. That was the fact I had been carrying for 30 days, and it did not get lighter for being named. Judge Calloway delivered the civil judgment at 2:15 in the afternoon. The power of attorney of May 26th was declared void ab initio, without legal effect from the moment of its creation. The amendment of June 11th likewise. All transactions executed under either instrument were unwound. The full corporate assets of Prescott Architecture Group, totaling $8.3 million, were restored to Walter J. Prescott. The Meridian International Commission intellectual property in its entirety returned to its originating architect. The federal criminal sentences had been handed down the previous Thursday in U.S. District Court. I had not attended that proceeding by choice. Grant Halford, 18 to 22 years. Federal system, no parole eligibility for the first 15. Gerald Moss. License revoked by the Georgia Medical Board, $180,000 in fines and restitution. 36 months probation. Dominic, 12 to 15 years, 12 to 15 years. I wrote the number on the legal pad in front of me and looked at it for a moment. Then I closed the pad. Outside, the July heat was absolute and merciless, the kind that makes the pavement seem to breathe. Taft found me on the steps with my jacket over my arm. 7 families, he said. Mr. Prescott, all 7. Everything frozen, everything referred. What you put together in 48 hours gave us what 14 months couldn't. He paused. That matters. I nodded. Cornelius appeared at my left and placed one hand briefly on my shoulder, a gesture that required no elaboration and received none. I sat down on the steps. The July sun came down without sympathy on Wright Square, on the live oaks and the fountain and the pigeons and the lawyers walking briskly in both directions. All of it continuing at its ordinary pace, the way a city continues, regardless of what has just been decided inside its buildings. A pigeon landed 3 feet away, considered us briefly and left. "You all right?" Cornelius asked. "No," I said. "Good," he said. Anyone who walks out of something like this feeling fine isn't somebody who was paying attention. I drove home alone, stood in the hallway for a while, with my jacket over the banister, and the house doing what houses do, holding still, holding everything, making no comment on any of it. Then I went back out to the car. I took the Marsh Road's east windows down the salt air coming in off the water, past the point where the city thins out and becomes something older and quieter, past the places where the live oaks grow so close to the road, their roots have lifted the pavement in long, patient ridges. I was driving toward Isle of Hope. The marsh roads east of Savannah do not hurry anyone along. They move through stands of live oak so old and close that their canopy meets overhead, filtering the afternoon light into something green and diffuse, and then open suddenly onto stretches of cordgrass and tidal flat that smell of salt and low water and the particular mineral honesty of a coast that has not been improved. I had driven these roads before years ago on Sunday afternoons, when Eleanor wanted to think without talking. She had loved the way the landscape refused to be domesticated. I found the address Marcus had noted in his file 3 weeks before, a white clapboard house at the end of a lane where the land gives way to Skidaway Narrows, with a dock that extended maybe 20 feet over the water, and a gardenia hedge along the front walk so heavy with bloom that the sweetness reached me before I had finished closing the car door. Estelle opened the door before I knocked. She looked at my face, the suit, The undone collar, the particular quality of a man who has just spent 7 hours in a courthouse and said nothing about any of it. She simply stepped back and held the door. "Tea," she said. "Kitchen." We sat at a pine table that had probably been in that kitchen since before either of us was born, with the windows open to the water and the tide moving slowly in the narrows below. She poured without asking what I wanted. I told her about the judgment, the civil restoration, the criminal sentences, the POA declared void from its first moment. She listened the way she had listened in the apartment on Bull Street, completely without filling the spaces between facts with commentary. When I finished, she set her cup down. 7 families, she said quietly. 7 families. She had known about them before I did. I realized that now. I looked at the water through the window for a moment. "Why did you warn me?" I said. "You could have let it go. It wasn't your business. You didn't owe me anything." She was quiet for long enough that I thought she might redirect the question. Then she folded her hands on the table and looked at them. "And 30 years ago," she said, "I was in my 2nd year on the bench. A case came before me, a man 67 years old, a contractor. His son had forged documents transferring the equity in his business to a shell company. The case had procedural problems. I ruled on a technicality." A pause. "The correct ruling. By the letter of what was in front of me. The wrong ruling by every other measure." She looked up. "He lost everything. He died 19 months later. His doctor said it was cardiac failure. I have always believed it was something else." The gardenia smell moved through the kitchen on the afternoon air. When Dominic came to my door about the apartment, she continued. He was charming and thorough and asked very specific questions about the sightline from the 4th-floor windows of the building across the street. He didn't know I had spent 40 years learning to read the difference between a man who is curious and a man who is measuring. She paused. I tried to reach Vivienne. He had redirected her number calls from my line, went to a voicemail she never received. I could not get to anyone close to you. She looked at me directly. So I waited. I knew Dominic had given you that apartment for a reason. I knew eventually you would come. 2 months, I said. I've waited longer for harder things, she said simply. I held a teacup without drinking. How did you know Eleanor? I said. The shift in Estelle's face was small and unmistakable, the particular softening of someone who has been holding a name carefully for a long time and has just been given permission to set it down. We met in 1988, she said. A bar association dinner. She came with a young architect who spent the entire evening talking to the people he already knew, so she talked to me instead. A small pause. We were friends for 35 years. She was the most honest person I have ever known. Not honest in the way people mean when they say someone speaks their mind. Honest in the sense that she did not pretend to herself about anything. Not about what she wanted. Not about what frightened her. Not about the people she loved. I was watching the water. She called me in September of 2023, Estelle said. About 6 weeks before she died. She was very clear about why she was calling. Estelle looked at her hands again. She said, look after him. Not because he can't manage, he can manage anything, but because he will never ask anyone for help, and someday that is going to cost him something he can't afford to lose. The kitchen was quiet except for the tidal sound from the narrows and the small movements of the afternoon. I did not trust my voice. I was aware of that the way you are aware of a structural limitation, not with alarm, just with the knowledge that certain loads should not be placed on certain members. She would have been glad. Estelle said finally. Eleanor, she would have been very glad about all of it. I nodded. It was all I had. I left Isle of Hope at 6 o'clock. The marsh roads back into the city were the same as they had been on the way out. The old oaks, the tidal flats, the light going gold now across the cord grass. The same roads, a different direction. It took me 6 months to fully understand what that afternoon had given me, but that night, driving back alone through the Savannah dark, I already knew one thing, something had moved, not repaired, not concluded, moved. The way a building settles after the last beam is place not finished, not perfect, but finally bearing its own weight the way it was designed to. The monocular was in my jacket pocket when I came through the door for the last time. I had not planned to bring it. It had simply been on the entry table at Monterey Square when I picked up my keys that morning, and the habit of the past 6 months had placed it in my hand before I decided whether I wanted it there. I set it on the windowsill when I arrived and stood in the empty room for a while, heart pine floors, high ceilings, the particular silence of a space waiting to find out what comes next. The buyers take possession on Friday, a young couple, both architects, who asked during the walkthrough whether the west-facing windows got good afternoon light. I told them yes and did not elaborate on everything that light had once made visible. December in Savannah sits at 58 degrees and a particular clarity. The humidity that softens summer air is gone and the city shows itself in sharper lines. Bull Street below was quiet in the middle of a Saturday afternoon, the live oaks stripped down to their essential forms, Spanish moss moving slowly in the wind off the river. I stood at the window. Across Drayton Street in the third-floor office I had watched from this distance on a June evening, 6 months ago, Raymond Whitlock was bent over a drafting table. The desk lamp was on. His posture had the specific stillness of someone concentrating in the way that work requires, not performing, just present. He had been managing Prescott Architecture Group for 6 weeks, and in those 6 weeks, the Meridian drawings had moved ahead of schedule. I had signed the Meridian contract myself in August. Walter J. Prescott in my own hand in a conference room with Evangeline sitting to my left. $4.5 million for a commission that had nearly been taken before it was finished. The lines had not changed. They were the same ones I had watched projected on a wall screen through this monocular on a Sunday night in June, not knowing then whether I would ever put my own signature beneath them. I had put my own signature beneath them. In the months between that August afternoon and this December one, the other things had settled into place with the quiet logic of things that were always going to happen once the obstruction was cleared. 7 families their cases referred. Their losses partially restored, the process incomplete, in the way legal remedies always are when measured against what was actually taken. Vivienne had filed for divorce in September. I had called her afterward, not with comfort exactly, but with the plain acknowledgement that she had been braver than she knew when she sat at a corner table in the Starland district and pushed a phone across to a man who had reason to doubt her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you," and I understood she was not thanking me for the call. Cornelius and I had breakfast every Wednesday at a place on Broughton Street where the coffee arrived without ordering. We did not talk about the case. We talked about the city and a garage renovation he had been planning for 3 years and continuing to not begin. It was enough. Estelle and I met every Sunday at her kitchen table on Isle of Hope with tea and the particular December quiet of a house by water in winter. We talked about Eleanor, not about what had happened, but about who she had been, the things she said, the way she ended arguments by simply describing what was true and waiting for the room to catch up. I had known Eleanor for 31 years. In 6 Sundays with Estelle, I learned things about my wife that 31 years had not given me. I did not find that sad. On Tuesday and Thursday evenings, I taught at SCADE, a graduate seminar in structural design for students whose tuition had been waived, 23 people who had not yet learned to doubt their own ideas. It was the most useful place I could think of to put the next few years. I picked up the monocular, held it without raising it, turned it once in my hand and thought about a Sunday evening in June when I had sat on a wooden floor in the dark with this instrument in my lap, watching my life change at 58 feet. Raymond had not moved from the drafting table. There are things you pass on without intending to. The angle of a shoulder over a drawing, the way a lamp is positioned, the refusal to leave a problem unresolved before going home. I had learned these things from watching my own father work, and somewhere in 18 months of proximity, Raymond had absorbed them without either of us arranging it. I used to believe what we pass on is chosen. I know now it is not. The only question is whether you have been worth the passing. I placed the monocular on the windowsill. I set the key beside it. Then I picked it back up, held the full weight of this small, ordinary thing that had arrived in a wooden box as a gift, and had become something else entirely, and had become something else again. The view through this window had shown me the worst thing I had ever seen. It had also given me 6 months of mornings in which I knew exactly what I was fighting for. 74 years old, buildings standing in this city that will outlast me by 100 years. The most important foundation I ever fought for was nearly taken without a struggle. I will not make that mistake again. Some foundations, once you have truly fought for them, hold forever. I put the key in my pocket and walked out. I am Walter Prescott, and this has been my family story. I built structures meant to outlast me. I forgot to protect the foundation closest to home. That is the mistake I almost didn't survive. Family betrayal doesn't announce itself. It arrives wearing a familiar face, holding a gift, calling it love. I waited too long to look clearly at the people I trusted most, and nearly lost everything I had spent 40 years building. Don't wait the way I waited. Look clearly. Look early. God gives us discernment for a reason. Use it before you need it desperately. My personal belief, trust is not weakness. But trust without awareness is a foundation poured without testing the ground beneath it. Every family story has the version people tell and the version the documents reveal. Know which one you are actually living in. Family betrayal leaves marks that legal victories cannot fully erase. I won in court. I still sit with the weight of it on certain evenings. That is the part no one warns you about. If this family story made you feel something, say it in the comments. If it made you think of someone who needs to hear it, share it. And if you want to stay for whatever comes next, you know where the subscribe button is. Thank you for watching until the very end. It means more than you know. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and awareness. If that's not what you're here for, no judgment. Choose what serves you.